Hello and welcome to this week's discussion on the business model canvas. To set the framework for what we'll be discussing this week, within the business model, what we're talking about is a rationale for how the organization creates, delivers, and captures value. And so what that means is that as a precursor to developing a business plan, we're going to talk about a new technique that is gaining rapid momentum at a number of universities called the business model canvas, that allows you to go through and think about the disparate pieces of the organization and how to make them connect and fit with one another. This is what the business model canvas looks like, and the core elements here are segmented into a variety of different pieces that we'll cover during this lecture and in the subsequent lectures that we'll do this week. To orient you to the structure that we'll go today, we'll begin with a conversation on customer segments, and we'll also talk about customer relationships, the value proposition, and channels. In part 2 of the business model canvas that we'll discuss next time, we'll address the other elements of the canvas. So the first thing we'll talk about is customer segments. And what we mean by that are the different groups of people that are prospective buyers of your products and services. And the reason that we segment can be motivated by a number of different elements. One is that the needs of the specific segment or that specific audience differ from one to another. How we may reach them through distribution may vary. The relationships that are needed or the profitability of those groups may vary. And also what they're going to pay for as far as the features or functions may vary. And so as an example of such a thing, you could think of the segmentation of a certain audience. For example, your smartphone or your iPhone style users, and that the initial segment that was targeted by Apple were largely people that were already familiar with the brand, people that may have already owned one or more Apple products, people that were perhaps relatively young, people that were affluent to the element of being able to pay a premium for the product when it first came to market, and people that may have already been engaged with iTunes or other complementary assets that the organization offered. So what we mean by the targeting of them is that the marketing was geared towards them, the price points were geared towards them, and the features and functions were geared towards them. And as they built a foothold and built initial market base there, it allowed them to grow and scale, to have more economies of scale, to lower the price of the product, to allow other people to touch and see what a friend or family or colleague may have in their iPhone, and gradually work their way through the market. And so this very much parallels the prior discussion that we had regarding innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, of how they built their way into the market. So with customer segments, it's very similar to thinking about what niche do you want to pursue and what niches might you pursue later. Segmentation certainly exists in different types as well. So you might have something that's mass market, and an example of this would be something like a Coca-Cola, and that the price is the same, the form and the feature and the function is the same, no matter who the market is, and it is kind of a one-size-fits-all type product. These are relatively rare, and they are relatively rare among startups. Niche markets are much more common with startups, in that you can find a need that is not presently addressed in the market. You can find the need that may be too small for a big company to pursue, but for a small company it may present a market opportunity and a profit opportunity that's very compelling for you. The segmentation of how you do that and diversification we'll talk about as well. But with this, it's oriented towards what's the degree of difference group to group, as well as how you would market to them. What magazines might you target? What websites might you target? What are the different mediums that you would reach them? And as we mentioned earlier, if the needs and wants of a market differ, and if the needs and wants and willingness to pay of the segments differ, then they should be focused and pursued in a certain order and breaking your overall market into smaller chunks that we call segments. There are also multi-sided aspects as well that we'll discuss. So one of the key elements within the business model canvas beyond this element of the customer segment is the value proposition. So what is the bundle of products or services that create value for a specific customer segment? What is it that they really get regarding the benefit of the product or service? What needs are being satisfied? And what are we offering to them explicitly that's better or different than what they may currently have access to? So it goes beyond what's a specific feature or function, and it addresses a higher order question of What's the value that's being provided from that feature or function? And we see these happen in a number of different ways. There are elements of price or cost. Is this a product or service that's going to help them make money? Is it going to help them save money? Is it reducing risk? Is it more convenient? Is it more usable? So these are all things that can be measured. There are other qualitative things that are more difficult to measure, and that's what we mean by qualitative. Is the factor of being new of value to a specific audience? Is the performance, the design, the look, or the feel more valuable? The brand itself, does it elicit some element of feeling or emotion within the audience that you're targeting? Or is there some element of customization that they can achieve as well? So among these 10 different elements, these are a sample and are not necessarily exhaustive, but are the types of things that most customers are buying products because, again, there's an element of cost savings or revenue generation, of convenience, of usability, of performance, of brand, of design. They just simply like the look of it. So these are the types of things that you would consider when bringing a product or service to market. Channels is another piece of the canvas that we'll explore. And so with channels, what we're referring to here is how the company creates, communicates, and reaches the ultimate end user. And with that, you can use your channels to help raise awareness. So it might be a marketing channel. It can also help and position the product with the customer. So it might be a retail channel of how are they physically going to buy the product. And are there companies that you need to partner with or work with to get that product or service in front of them? There might also be channels involved with customer support, warranties, repairs, things of that nature. So channels can exist in many different areas, but ultimately they gear towards how are you going to reach and serve your customers. And key considerations when thinking about these channels are how are you going to reach them? How are they going to be familiar and ultimately make the buying decision and get the product or service? How can you integrate across channels? How do you know which channels are working most effectively? If you are thinking, for example, of how am I going to establish a sales channel, maybe I'm going to have a website that I'm going to sell through. Maybe I'm going to post my product on an Amazon.com. Maybe I'm going to sell directly in partnership through a retailer. Maybe I'm going to sell broadly through distributors and wholesalers. So you have a variety of different options, each of which have different pros and cons, each of which might have a different measure of profitability for you. And so in that way, you want to be sure that you have a feel for this landscape and that you have a tool or techniques in mind for how to measure the effectiveness of each channel. Customer relationships are another piece of the business model canvas. And with that, the key element here is that you have a feel for how you're going to acquire customers, how you're going to retain customers. And what we mean by upselling is that do you have the type of product or service that you can sell a higher level version or an extension or a replacement of that product or service? So in summary, today we've discussed 4 of the 9 elements of the business model canvas. We've talked a bit about customer segments and the value of segmentation, value propositions, and what is it beyond features and functions that make your product compelling. We've talked about customer relationships, and lastly, we've talked about channels and what's it take to position your product in the market in the context of marketing and operations and sales. Next time, we'll talk about key partners and activities, resources, and we'll spend a bit of time talking about financials and the cost structures and revenue streams of the organization. Thank you.